React wisely, not emotionally. A speech in the style of Marcus Aurelius. Fellow seekers of wisdom, there is no greater challenge to the soul than the storms of passion. A man who surrenders to his emotions is like a ship without a captain, tossed by every wave, dashed against every rock. But he who governs himself with reason is like the steady oak, unmoved by the winds that howl around it. When anger rises, when fear grips the heart, when sorrow darkens the mind, pause. Ask yourself, is this within my control? Will my wrath undo the wrong? Will my sorrow change the past? Will my fear prevent what is to come? If the answer is no, then why give these things power over you? To act from emotion is to be a slave, to act from reason is to be free. Consider this, when fire meets fire, does it not grow fiercer? But when fire meets water, it is extinguished. The wise man meets insult with silence, hatred with patience, adversity with courage. He does not strike because he has been struck, he does not curse because he has been cursed. He masters himself, and in doing so, he masters all. Remember, the mind is your own. No man can take from you your judgment, your reason, your virtue. They are yours alone to keep or to squander. Will you let another man's folly dictate your actions? Will you let fleeting emotion rule what should be ruled by wisdom? The dog barks at the wind, the fool rages at fate, but the wise man walks his path undisturbed. Therefore, let us not react in haste, not in anger, not in despair. Let us, instead, stand firm in reason, anchored in wisdom, unmoved by the tempests of the world. This is the way of the strong, the way of the free, the way of the wise. Go forth, then not as one who is led by the passions, but as one who commands them. Emotions rise and fall like waves upon the sea, unpredictable and often violent. They flare up in moments of provocation, urging us toward rashness, making us speak before we think, act before we consider. Anger demands vengeance, fear demands retreat, sorrow seeks indulgence. These impulses, though natural, are not our masters unless we surrender to them. A man who allows himself to be ruled by his emotions is like a reed in the wind, bent by every passing storm, never standing firm, never his own. Reason, however, is steady. It does not flare up and then fade. It does not waver when tested. It is the foundation upon which the wise build their lives. When emotions push and pull in all directions, reason holds firm, guiding one toward right action. A man who thinks before he acts, who considers before he speaks, is a man who remains in command of himself. When another speaks harshly, emotion demands retaliation. But what is gained by answering anger with anger? If insulted, does it restore honor to trade words with a fool? If provoked, does striking out prove strength? The wise man knows that to respond in anger is to give power to another, to let another dictate one's actions. He who acts with wisdom, rather than impulse, remains sovereign over himself. Fear is another tyrant that seeks dominion over the mind. When danger is perceived, fear demands retreat, avoidance, hesitation. But is all fear justified? Often, it is not the thing itself that harms us, but our judgment of it. What is truly to be feared? Pain, hardship, loss. These things come to all men, yet not all men are broken by them. The wise do not react in panic but measure what is before them. They weigh the situation and act according to reason, not dread. Sorrow, too, tempts the heart to surrender. Grief clouds judgment, making it seem as though nothing remains but suffering. Yet, sorrow, like all emotions, is transient. To give oneself wholly to it is to live in illusion, for even the deepest sorrow passes. The wise do not deny pain, but neither do they become prisoners to it. They recognize it, endure it, and move forward, knowing that time and reason heal all wounds. To act with reason is not to deny emotion but to master it. The passions exist within us, but they are tools, not rulers. The craftsman does not let his tools control him, he wields them with precision, using each as needed. Likewise, the wise man acknowledges his emotions but does not let them dictate his course. He feels anger but does not lash out. He feels fear but does not flee. He feels sorrow but does not fall into despair. Wisdom is not found in mere knowledge but in restraint, in discipline, in the ability to choose one's response rather than be swept away by the first impulse. This is the difference between the weak and the strong, between the fool and the wise. The man who is ruled by his emotions is not free, He is a captive of every passing mood, a slave to anger, fear, and sorrow. When provoked, he lashes out without thought, as though another holds the reins of his mind. When frightened, he flees without considering whether danger is real or imagined. When faced with hardship, he despairs, believing his suffering is greater than he can bear. In all these things, he is not his own master. He is driven, not by reason, but by impulse. To react wisely is to claim one's freedom. A man who governs himself does not allow anger to cloud his judgment or fear to dictate his actions. He pauses, considers, and chooses the best course, unaffected by the chaos around him. He is steady where others waver, calm where others rage. He does not give power over himself to those who seek to provoke him, nor does he allow misfortune to shake his foundation. His actions are his own, not dictated by circumstance but by wisdom. Consider the man who, when insulted, responds in fury. He believes he is defending his honor, but in truth, he is handing control to another. The one who insulted him has dictated his reaction, pulling him into a battle not of his choosing. But the man who meets insult with silence, or with measured words, remains master of himself. He chooses his response, rather than having it chosen for him. In this, he is free. Fear, too, binds the man who does not think before he acts. How often do men avoid challenges, shrink from difficulties, or refuse to face what is necessary because fear has gripped them? They do not weigh the reality of danger but instead allow their minds to be ruled by imagined outcomes. But the wise man does not flee without reason. He assesses, he judges, and if action is required, he takes it. He does not allow fear to cage him, to keep him from the path he must walk. Sorrow can also enslave those who do not temper it with wisdom. It is natural to grieve, to feel loss, to suffer disappointment. But if one sinks into despair, if one allows sorrow to become all-consuming, then he has given up his freedom. He has let an emotion rule over him as a tyrant rules over subjects. The wise man, though he feels sorrow, does not allow it to define him. He bears it with dignity, knowing that all things pass, and he moves forward. The difference between the wise and the foolish is not that one feels less than the other, but that one controls his responses while the other is controlled by them. He who reacts emotionally is not acting of his own will, he is being moved like a puppet on strings. But he who governs himself, who reacts not with impulse but with wisdom, is truly free. The strongest man is not the one who lifts the heaviest weight or strikes the hardest blow. Strength is not found in force alone, nor in dominance over others. True strength is mastery over oneself, the ability to command one's own mind and actions regardless of what the world brings. A man who cannot control his temper, his fear, or his sorrow is weak. No matter how powerful he appears, he is easily manipulated, easily provoked, easily swayed by the winds of emotion. He is not his own master, but a servant to whatever passion overtakes him. To rule oneself is to possess the greatest power. The man who has mastery over his emotions does not react in haste, nor does he allow external events to dictate his behavior. He is not angered by insults, for he knows that another's words do not change his worth. He does not cower in fear, for he understands that most fears are creations of the mind. He does not fall into despair, for he knows that all things, both good and bad, are temporary. He is like a fortress standing against the storms, unmoved by the tempests of life. When anger arises, it is easy to give in to it, to let it guide the hand and the tongue. Many believe that yielding to rage is a sign of power, that striking back when struck proves strength. But what is easier, to surrender to anger or to restrain it? A wild beast reacts without thought, but a man who governs himself does not let his rage determine his course. He may feel the fire within, but he does not let it consume him. He chooses his words carefully, his actions deliberately. This is strength. Fear, too, seeks to rule the mind, whispering caution where none is needed, urging retreat where one should stand firm. Many men are slaves to their fears, avoiding challenges, shrinking from difficulty. They do not act because they are afraid of failure, afraid of pain, afraid of what others will say. But the man who has mastered himself does not let fear dictate his choices. He acknowledges it, understands it, and moves forward despite it. He does not let imagined dangers prevent him from living as he ought. Sorrow weakens those who do not control it. Pain and loss come to all, but some allow suffering to take hold of them, to make them believe that they cannot go on. They sink into despair, forgetting that all wounds heal with time. But the man who rules himself does not let sorrow define him. He endures it, accepts it, and moves forward with dignity. He does not let pain turn him into something lesser than he was. To control oneself in the face of emotion is the greatest strength. The man who masters himself is unshaken by the world, unbroken by hardship, untouched by provocation. He walks his path with certainty, knowing that nothing outside of him holds power over his mind, his will, or his soul. A man may lose his wealth, his health, his position, even those dearest to him, yet still, he remains in possession of the one thing no force in the world can take: his judgment. The world is full of chaos, full of unexpected misfortunes and trials, yet none of these things determine the character of a man. It is not the event itself that harms or elevates, but the way one chooses to see it, to respond to it, to interpret its meaning. One man may be ruined by the same hardship that makes another stronger. One may crumble under an insult that another laughs off. The difference is not in what happened, but in how it was judged. If a man believes that an insult wounds him, he will be wounded. If he believes an offense demands his anger, he will rage. But if he judges that words are nothing more than air, that another's foolishness is no burden of his own, then he remains unmoved. The insult is the same, only the reaction differs. So, who truly has power? The one who lets another dictate his emotions, or the one who stands above such things, choosing his own response? The same is true of misfortune. A man loses his wealth and believes himself ruined. But what is wealth except possessions? Did he not come into the world with nothing? If he judges that his worth depended on riches, then he will feel loss as destruction. But if he judges that his character, his reason, and his virtue are the true measure of a man, then what has he truly lost? Fortune is fleeting, but wisdom remains. Pain and hardship come to all, yet suffering is not in the event itself, but in the mind's reaction to it. If one sees difficulty as unbearable, then he will break beneath it. But if he sees it as a test of endurance, as something to sharpen his resolve, then he will emerge stronger. A man who is struck by fate and sees himself as a victim will forever be at the mercy of the world. But the one who sees every trial as an opportunity to exercise patience, courage, and wisdom, this man is beyond the reach of misfortune. Fear, too, is nothing more than a judgment. The thing itself is not what terrifies, but one's belief about it. The unknown is not frightening in itself, but because one judges it as dangerous. Death is feared not because it is painful, but because men judge it as an end rather than a transition. To change one's judgment is to change one's experience. If a man chooses to see every situation through the lens of reason rather than emotion, he is free. External events do not have power over the soul. The body may suffer, possessions may be taken, loved ones may be lost, but the mind remains untouched unless one chooses to surrender it. He who controls his judgment controls his fate, no matter what befalls him. The world is ever changing, filled with misfortunes, provocations, and uncertainties. No man can escape the storms of life, but the difference between the wise and the foolish is how they endure them. Some are like leaves in the wind, tossed about by every difficulty, broken by every hardship. Others stand firm, unmoved by what they cannot control, rooted in their own strength. True power does not come from controlling the world, for no man has such authority. It comes from controlling oneself, from remaining steady when all else is in turmoil. Anger, fear, sorrow, these emotions rise like tempests, seeking to pull a man from his course. He who allows himself to be swept away by them loses his power. He who rages at insults gives control to those who provoke him. He who cowers before difficulty becomes a prisoner of his own fear. He who surrenders to despair becomes weaker with every sorrow he endures. But the man who remains unmoved, who governs himself instead of being governed by emotion, is truly strong. If another speaks harshly, what has truly happened? Only words have been spoken. If misfortune strikes, what has truly changed? Only external circumstances. These things have no power unless one allows them to. The wise man does not give weight to what does not deserve it. He does not grant another the ability to wound him with mere words. He does not let hardship shake his spirit, for he knows that nothing outside of him defines him. Pain is real, but suffering is a choice. The body may be afflicted, but the mind remains free. A man who understands this does not lament his troubles or curse his fate. He does not beg for life to be easier, for he knows that true strength is found in endurance, not in ease. He does not fear loss, for he understands that nothing external is truly his to keep. He does not despair over what he cannot change, for his peace comes from within, not from circumstances. To react emotionally is to surrender power. To respond with wisdom is to claim it. The man who can meet insult with calm, misfortune with resilience, and hardship with patience is a man who cannot be broken. He does not allow himself to be controlled by what is fleeting. He does not waste his energy fighting against what is beyond him. Instead, he focuses on what is his alone, his mind, his judgment, his actions. Life's storms will come, as they come for all. Some will be crushed beneath them, blaming the winds and the rain. Others will stand firm, unshaken by what they cannot control. They will endure, not because life is kind to them, but because they have mastered themselves. This is the difference between weakness and strength, between captivity and freedom, between folly and wisdom. The world may be in chaos, but the wise man remains steady, untouched by its storms.